Alan Dershowitz believed he could embarrass Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett on live TV by ridiculing her law degree. Yet the Texas Democrats' next move left the Harvard veteran silent and possibly revealed the greatest weakness of the legal elite. The lights of CNN blazed as the two legal heavyweights squared off in what would soon become the year's most explosive political clash. On one side was Alan Dershowitz, 85 years old, Harvard law professor emeritus, defender of celebrities and controversial figures for more than 50 years. His gray suit was perfectly tailored, and he radiated confidence like he owned the studio. Across from him sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, 43, a civil rights attorney turned Texas representative. Her purple blazer was sharp, her eyes focused, and she looked prepared for a fight. This wasn't going to be a courteous legal chat. Within moments, Dershowitz launched a verbal strike that shocked the audience, attacking not only Crockett's understanding of law, but also her very qualifications. He assumed his Harvard pedigree would intimidate the young congresswoman from Dallas. He could not have been more wrong. He just made the mistake that might ruin his legacy, murmured a legal analyst, watching from the green room. He has no clue what Jasmine Crockett can do. The showdown that followed would go viral in minutes, reshaping how America views both the old legal elite and the rising generation of black women leaders. Before we get to the confrontation, the broadcast teased viewers. Hit subscribe and drop your location in the comments. You're about to see legal history unfold. The energy inside CNN's studio was electric. Camera operators zoomed in on both faces. Dershowitz wore his classic smirk of scholarly superiority, while Crockett's gaze carried the steely focus of a trial attorney ready to strike. Even the production team sensed a storm was coming. Veteran host Anderson Cooper later said he could feel the difference from the very first second. The air practically crackled. What came next would prove that sometimes a student doesn't merely surpass the teacher, they annihilate them on live national television. This was no polite academic forum and no ordinary cable panel. It was about to become a masterclass in how hands-on legal skill can shatter academic arrogance under the spotlight. To see why this battle mattered, you need to know exactly who these two figures are and why their collision signaled a tectonic shift in American law and politics. For over 50 years, Alan Dershowitz embodied elite American legal culture. Harvard professor, prolific author, defender of O.J. Simpson, Jeffrey Epstein, and Donald Trump. His career reads like a highlight reel of controversial high-profile defenses. At 85, he is used to being the smartest man in the room, the voice everyone defers to. His career has rested on constitutional law, civil liberties, and an unwavering belief in his intellectual dominance. His Harvard credentials have opened every door, earned him op-ed spots in every major paper, and given him a seat on every talk show. Yet lately, his image has faltered. Ties to Jeffrey Epstein tarnished his name. Defending Trump alienated old allies. Young lawyers now whisper that his era has passed, that he represents a fading establishment clinging to old hierarchies. Still, he carries himself like someone untouchable, armored in Harvard prestige. Jasmine Crockett, on the other hand, represents what the old legal order fears and fails to comprehend. Raised in St. Louis, she worked her way through school without the privilege and connections of the Ivy League world. She earned her law degree from the University of Houston Law Center. Not Ivy League, but respected for producing lawyers who serve real communities. Before Congress, Crockett was a civil rights lawyer in Dallas, battling police brutality, defending voting rights, and representing those who could never afford elite firms. She didn't write papers for academic journals. She fought in real courts, won actual cases, and changed real lives. In Congress, since 2023, she quickly built a reputation for razor-sharp questioning in hearings, cutting through political spin with precise legal skill, and refusing to be intimidated by anyone no matter their resume. She symbolizes a new wave of black women leaders who merge real-world lawyering with political acumen, unafraid to confront entrenched power. Yet tonight, she entered Dershowitz's arena, televised legal debate where pedigree usually outweighs courtroom grit. The clash symbolized a larger cultural transformation. One side, the old guard, mostly white, mostly male, Ivy League educated, certain their credentials grant authority. The other side, a new generation, diverse, battle-tested, and connected to communities the establishment long ignored. The legal field has wrestled with this divide for years. Law schools grow more diverse, but the upper tiers remain Ivy. Lawyers from state schools constantly have to prove themselves to judges and partners who equate Ivy with intelligence. Crockett's very presence in Congress undermines that bias. She didn't attend Harvard or Yale, yet her questioning routinely outshines those who did. She represents a district with some of the nation's most complex, legal and social issues, handling them with a mastery that makes elite credentials look secondary. To Dershowitz, she was a direct challenge to the worldview that had defined his life, that elite education equals elite minds, that Harvard automatically bestows superiority. His identity was built on institutional prestige. Facing a lawyer from a regional school who could match him, more surpassed him, was more than a professional threat. It was existential. To Crockett, it was another chance to prove that legal excellence is measured not by the school on your diploma, but by the impact of your work. She'd done it in courtrooms, hearings, and any setting where skeptics tried to diminish her. Tonight, she would do it for millions to see. The stage was set. Two visions of American legal power on a collision course. By the end, one reputation would rise, and another would crack. As cameras rolled, viewers had no idea they were about to witness a textbook lesson in how authentic legal expertise can dismantle institutional arrogance. The CNN panel opened like any other. Anderson Cooper introduced a discussion on the newest developments in Trump's federal election interference case. On the surface, it was just another legal segment, one both Dershowitz and Crockett had done countless times before. We begin with the constitutional issues tied to executive privilege. Cooper glanced back and forth between his two guests. Professor Dershowitz, you've produced numerous writings on presidential authority. Dershowitz leaned in, slipping into his comfort zone. Anderson, these are precisely the kinds of intricate, constitutional matters that demand a profound grasp of founding principles and years of scholarly study. Courts must look to historical precedent rather than yielding to political winds. His tone carried a professorial air, tinged with the condescension of academics who assume their audience cannot fully comprehend their field's complexity. He spoke slowly, with careful deliberation, as though teaching basic concepts to children. Crockett listened in silence, jotting down notes, her expression neutral yet intent. She had heard this type of lofty lecturing before, and knew exactly where it was heading. Congresswoman Crockett, Cooper said, continuing, you've emphasized accountability in this matter. How do you see the constitutional dimension? Thank you, Anderson, Crockett replied, her voice clear and professional. Though constitutional scholarship has value, we cannot overlook the real-world facts. The evidence displays a repeated pattern of behavior breaching both constitutional principles and federal law. The real question isn't about respect for the office of the presidency, it's whether anyone, including presidents, stands above the law. Her answer was succinct, factual, and rooted in practical implications rather than theory. She avoided unnecessary jargon, speaking like a lawyer with real courtroom experience, not just academic study. Dershowitz's expression shifted. He had anticipated deference, not a firm, alternative argument. His reply carried the first trace of condescension that would later erupt into outright disrespect. Well, Congresswoman, I value your political insight, but constitutional law calls for a level of nuance far beyond what congressional hearings typically produce. These are intricate doctrines that take years to master. The words landed like a verbal slap. He was insinuating that Crockett's understanding was shallow, that her political role rendered her unfit for serious constitutional analysis, a classic dismissal, familiar to women and people of color in professional environments. The subtle message, their expertise is somehow less legitimate. Crockett's jaw tightened slightly, but her voice remained even. Professor, I think you might be surprised at how much constitutional law members of Congress must actually understand. We swear an oath to uphold the Constitution, and many of us take that duty extremely seriously. Of course, Dershowitz waved his hand dismissively. But there's a distinction between political knowledge and genuine legal scholarship. This sort of deep constitutional analysis comes only from academic training and decades of rigorous study. Cooper tried to steer the conversation toward concrete legal precedents, but Dershowitz couldn't relinquish his need for intellectual dominance. When Crockett began citing case law and analyzing their implications, he committed the error that would define the evening. Congresswoman, you're citing cases, which is fine, but do you truly have the legal background to understand their constitutional weight? Where did you study law? He asked it with a faint smile, the sort of academic smirk that implies, I already know your answer won't impress me. It was a textbook elite tactic, discrediting credentials to avoid confronting the argument. Crockett paused briefly, fully aware of the maneuver. She had seen this play before. Credential checking from those with elite pedigrees, though usually behind closed doors. This time, it was on live television. I studied at the University of Houston Law Center, she said evenly. Not Harvard, if that's what you're implying. Dershowitz's smile widened. Ah, that explains the difference in our analytical approaches. Houston is a respectable regional school, I'm sure, but constitutional law at this level requires the rigorous preparation only top-tier institutions provide. Harvard, Yale, places that truly ready lawyers for these questions. The studio went still. Cooper visibly shifted, sensing the line had been crossed from professional debate into personal attack. In the background, the production crew froze. Even camera operators seemed to feel the weight of the moment. Legal professionals watching across the country were stunned. Dershowitz had committed a cardinal sin of discourse. He went after her pedigree instead of her argument, exposing his own elitism in the process. Professor Dershowitz, Crockett said, her tone calm but edged. Are you implying that lawyers from non-Ivy League schools are incapable of grasping constitutional law? I'm not implying anything, he responded, certain of his advantage. I'm stating the reality. There is a difference in training and preparation. True constitutional scholarship demands a level of rigor that, frankly, most regional law schools can't offer. Crockett leaned back, her eyes taking on a look familiar to those who knew her well. This was no longer a matter of casual condescension. She was now preparing to dismantle it entirely. That's interesting, Professor. So your view is that a lawyer's understanding of constitutional principles is dictated by their alma mater. Experience matters. Congresswoman. Academic pedigree matters. The quality of one's legal education matters. These are simply facts. Dershowitz was doubling down, blissfully unaware that he was stepping into a trap. His certainty in his intellectual superiority was unshakable. He thought he was delivering a lesson in legal hierarchy. Instead, he was about to learn one publicly, before millions. Well then, Professor, Crockett said, her voice now carrying a weight that made Cooper straighten in his chair. Let's put that theory to the test. The statement lingered in the room like a thrown gauntlet. The CNN studio, already hushed, slipped into complete stillness. Across the nation, legal analysts in law firms and classrooms leaned forward in anticipation. Social media lit up as audiences sensed that a pivotal moment was about to unfold. Dershowitz, brimming with self-assurance, gave a smile and a nod. By all means, Congresswoman, I'm always eager for a serious legal debate. He had no clue that he had just consented to his own professional undoing on live television. What followed would be dissected on blogs, reposted on social media, and taught in law schools for years. Jasmine Crockett was on the verge of delivering a constitutional law masterclass, one that would reveal Alan Dershowitz's academic conceit and demonstrate that genuine legal skill isn't about an Ivy League diploma. Professor Dershowitz, Crockett began, her voice imbued with the authority of someone seasoned by courtroom battles. Since you believe academic pedigree dictates constitutional understanding, let's examine the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause and its relevance to executive accountability. She paused, locking eyes with him. You've repeatedly said in recent interviews that presidential immunity should be interpreted broadly. But doesn't that directly conflict with the Supreme Court's decision in Nixon v. Fitzgerald, particularly its distinction between civil and criminal liability? For presidential conduct, Dershowitz shifted in his seat. The question was razor-sharp, sophisticated, and invoked a nuanced legal principle demanding deep knowledge of constitutional law and Supreme Court precedent. This was no superficial talking point he had expected from a so-called regional law school graduate. Well, Nixon v. Fitzgerald addressed civil lawsuits specifically, he said, struggling to steady himself. Criminal prosecution involves different constitutional considerations. Exactly, Crockett replied, her eyes alight. Which brings us to the far more relevant case of Clinton v. Jones, where the court explicitly rejected broad claims of presidential immunity from judicial process. The court affirmed that the president is not above the law while in office. She pressed on without hesitation, weaving her argument like the practiced litigator she was. But let's go further. Since you value rigorous analysis, in Clinton, the court relied heavily on Youngstown Sheet and Tube v. Sawyer, specifically Justice Jackson's concurring opinion, which laid out the framework for evaluating executive power. Are you familiar with his three-tiered categories of presidential authority? Dershowitz nodded, but his confident grin faltered. Crockett was showcasing a mastery of constitutional law that exceeded anything he had braced for. She wasn't just listing cases, She was constructing a live, sophisticated legal argument. Good, Crockett continued. Then you know that, under Justice Jackson's framework, when a president acts without constitutional or statutory authorities, the evidence indicates here presidential power is at its weakest. And in such cases, the court has been clear, any claim of constitutional power is subjected to the strictest judicial scrutiny. Now, Professor, here's where my so-called regional law school education and real courtroom experience might actually matter, Crockett said, her tone sharpening. I've litigated constitutional cases involving government accountability. I've stood before federal judges, challenging executive overreach. I've seen firsthand how these principles play out when real people's rights are violated by officials who think they're untouchable. She leaned forward, voice rising with intensity. You can study constitutional theory at Cambridge all you want, but until you've stood in a courtroom, arguing that a police chief, a mayor, or a government official can't hide behind qualified immunity, you don't truly understand accountability. Dershowitz tried to cut in, but Crockett powered forward. I've represented voters whose rights were trampled by officials claiming they were just following orders. I've fought cases against government actors who insisted their positions shielded them from responsibility. And you know what I learned? The Constitution doesn't care about your title, your status, or your academic resume. It only cares about your actions. But let's address your record, Professor, since you think credentials equal credibility, Crockett said, her voice carrying the weight of meticulous preparation. You've spent years defending the wealthy and powerful clients who exploited their positions to dodge accountability. Take Jeffrey Epstein, for example. The studio froze. Anderson Cooper's eyes widened. Legal viewers around the country held their breath. Crockett had just turned Dershowitz's attack on her credentials into a devastating counterstrike. You used your Harvard prestige to argue for leniency for a man who sexually abused minors. You crafted legal strategies to help him evade full accountability for vile crimes. So tell me, Professor, what does that say about the rigorous academic training you're so proud of? Dershowitz flushed red. That's completely unfair. I was providing constitutional representation, were you? Crockett cut in, her prosecutorial instincts flaring. Or were you leveraging your elite credentials and reputation to shield a wealthy predator from justice? Because from my regional law school perspective, it looks like you used your Harvard pedigree to legitimize defending someone who deserved the full force of the law. And here's what's truly fascinating, she continued, now steering the entire exchange. You want to talk constitutional scholarship. Let's examine your recent arguments on presidential power. You've claimed President Trump's actions were shielded by executive privilege. Yet your own earlier writings contradict that position. She produced a tablet, clearly ready for this exact moment. In your 1982 article, Executive Privilege, a Constitutional Myth, she said, you wrote, and I quote, no president should be allowed to hide behind claims of executive privilege when there is evidence of potential criminal behavior. The Constitution demands accountability, not immunity. Dershowitz's mouth fell slightly open. She had caught him off guard. She had dug into his scholarly work and exposed the contradictions in his arguments. So, she continued, either you were wrong in 1982, or you are wrong now. Either way, your vaunted Harvard training seems to have led you to completely opposing constitutional conclusions. Depending on which president you are defending. The CNN studio was dead silent, except for the faint whir of cameras. Anderson Cooper looked stunned. Legal scholars across the country watching in real time were scribbling notes furiously, aware they were witnessing one legal heavyweight dismantle another. Dershowitz stammered. Constitutional interpretation evolves. No, Professor. Crockett interrupted firmly. Constitutional principles do not change depending on who pays your fees, or which party occupies the White House. That's precisely the kind of unprincipled reasoning my so-called regional law school education taught me to spot and reject. She turned to the camera, her tone steady and commanding, as if speaking directly to the audience. The Constitution isn't some Harvard seminar where abstract theories outweigh real-world consequences. It's a living document that shields real people from real abuses of power. And sometimes the lawyers who grasp that best are the ones who practiced law in the trenches, not just read about it in books. Anderson Cooper, ever the professional, tried to steer the discussion forward, but the damage was done. Dershowitz sat slumped in his chair, looking like a man publicly undone. His scholarly airs were punctured, his contradictions laid bare, and his elitist assumptions shattered. By a woman whose credentials he had just dismissed. Legal analysts at law schools across the nation immediately began cross-checking Crockett's arguments. Within minutes, her citations were verified as flawless, legally accurate, historically sound, and devastatingly effective. But her achievement went beyond technical mastery. She had demonstrated that true expertise isn't measured by diplomas or prestige, it's proven by understanding the principles you're sworn to defend and applying them when it counts. The studio atmosphere afterwards spoke volumes. CNN staff, many with law degrees, were quietly ecstatic. A producer whispered, "That's the best legal segment we've ever aired." Makeup artists and camera operators, veterans of countless talking head debates, knew they had just witnessed something extraordinary. Even security guards paused their rounds to watch the final exchange. As the segment ended and cameras went dark, everyone in the room understood that something remarkable had just happened. The traditional hierarchy of the legal world, its deference to pedigree over substance, had been shaken. Jasmine Crockett had introduced a new model of legal authority, one that blended intellectual sharpness with practical experience and refused to bow to elite credentials. The revolution had played out live, and the old guard would never see themselves the same way. Within minutes of the broadcast, the legal world erupted. What Jasmine Crockett had done to Alan Dershowitz was not merely a debate, when it was a paradigm shift destined to echo through courtrooms, classrooms, and political circles for years. The first viral post landed less than 30 seconds after the broadcast. A Georgetown law professor tweeted, "Did Jasmine Crockett just deliver the most devastating takedown in legal TV history? That wasn't a debate, that was a masterclass." Within 5 minutes, "Crockett destroys Dershowitz" was trending. On X, formerly Twitter, lawyers, law students, and political commentators were sharing clips faster than CNN's social media team could post them. The breakout moment, when Crockett threw his own 1982 article back in his face. That 15-second clip hit over 2 million views in its first hour. Legal, the YouTube lawyer with over 3 million subscribers, posted, "Holy Jasmine Crockett just used Alan Dershowitz's own scholarship to expose his hypocrisy on live TV. This is what happens when real trial lawyers meet academic blowhards." Law students nationwide quickly turned the moment into memes. The most popular showed Dershowitz's shocked expression with the caption, "When you realize regional law schools actually teach constitutional law too." But social media was only the tremor. The earthquake was in professional legal circles. Blogs and journals raced to break down the exchange. The Harvard Law Review's Twitter account posted a thread meticulously analyzing Crockett's arguments, confirming every citation and legal point. Their conclusion: regardless of pedigree, this was constitutional advocacy at its finest. Prominent scholars began publicly re-evaluating assumptions about legal expertise. UCLA's Professor Kimbrell Crenshaw tweeted, "This is why diversity in legal education matters. Different backgrounds and experiences create better lawyers." Even some Harvard professors distanced themselves from Dershowitz. Lawrence Tribe posted, "Legal authority comes from reasoning and knowledge, not institutional pedigree." Tonight was a reminder of that. The impact rippled into politics almost immediately. Democratic strategists saw Crockett's performance as a model for countering conservative intellectual posturing. One senior operative told Politico, "Jasmine just showed how to dismantle elitist condescension with facts and preparation. This will be studied in every Comes workshop." Republican commentators, meanwhile, stayed silent. Conservative legal pundits, who might normally defend Dershowitz, chose not to engage. The Congressional Black Caucus released a statement praising Crockett's mastery and preparation, calling her performance a model of the constitutional knowledge Americans deserve from their representatives. Even law school interest shifted overnight. The University of Houston Law Center, Crockett's alma mater, reported a 40% jump in website traffic within 24 hours, with many prospective students citing the CNN segment in inquiries. Admissions counselors at less prestigious law schools began fielding calls from prospective students asking about constitutional law programs and opportunities for hands-on legal experience. The takeaway was obvious. Students wanted to study law the way Crockett had done. Several law schools responded by launching programs centered on real-world application and principled advocacy, highlighting practical constitutional litigation and civil rights work, directly influenced by the public's fascination with Crockett's style of legal training. Elite law schools, on the other hand, reacted more cautiously. While individual professors applauded Crockett's showing, the schools themselves offered restrained responses, Harvard Law School issued a carefully crafted statement endorsing vigorous legal debate from all qualified participants, regardless of where they studied. Notably, the statement refrained from defending Dershowitz or his dismissive remarks about regional schools. Yale Law School's dean commented on LinkedIn, "Excellence in legal reasoning transcends institutional boundaries." Today's exchange showed that the quality of argument matters more than the prestige of the diploma. The most impactful academic reaction came from a coalition of professors from non-elite institutions, who published an open letter titled "Legal Excellence Beyond the Ivy League," signed by more than 200 professors from state and regional schools. The letter argued that Crockett's performance underscored the value of diverse educational pathways in developing strong legal advocates. Alan Dershowitz moved quickly to contain the fallout. Within hours of the CNN broadcast, he posted a blog entry called "Defending Academic Standards in Legal Education," insisting his comments were taken out of context and emphasizing his respect for attorneys from all schools. Yet the post failed to apologize for his dismissive remarks or acknowledge the strength of Crockett's constitutional reasoning. The explanation only worsened the backlash. Legal Twitter circulated screenshots of his blog alongside clips of his original statements, exposing the unconvincing nature of his retreat. Media outlets sought follow-up interviews, but his team declined every request. A silence that spoke volumes about the damage to his reputation outside of legal and political circles. The confrontation resonated in broader cultural conversations about expertise, authority, and professional respect. Women's professional groups praised Crockett as a model for responding to condescension in the workplace. The National Association of Women Lawyers posted, "Every woman who has been questioned about her credentials, instead of her arguments, should watch this clip." Civil rights organizations also drew lessons from the moment. The NAACP stated, "This is why representation matters. Different voices bring different strengths." Crockett's showing was a powerful demonstration of that. Principal experts in legal education predicted that the exchange would reshape how law schools recruit and market themselves. One researcher noted, "The traditional hierarchy of legal education has rested on manufactured scarcity and historic privilege." Crockett proved that hands-on experience and practical training can rival elite credentials. Several schools began highlighting their practical offerings and professional connections, rather than relying solely on academic prestige. Crockett's approach created a new blueprint for responding to elitist condescension in public forums. Meticulous preparation, sharp legal reasoning, and confident delivery. Public speaking coaches began dissecting her method. Political communication strategists integrated her style into training programs, and law professors cited the exchange as a prime example of persuasive legal advocacy. In Congress, her colleagues took notice. Lawmakers from both parties privately congratulated her, and Democratic leadership reportedly considered her for more prominent roles in constitutional discussions. The House Judiciary Committee even discussed granting her extended questioning time in future hearings. Republican members, meanwhile, adopted a noticeably more respectful tone in subsequent meetings. The message was unmistakable. Underestimating Crockett's legal skills was a mistake they would not make twice. Media professionals across the industry also paid attention. Multiple networks reached out to her office within days, eager to feature her as a legal commentator. It was evident that the era of exclusively deferring to elite academic pedigrees was fading. Audiences wanted experts who combined scholarship with real-world experience and principled advocacy. CNN itself began featuring a more diverse range of commentators, including attorneys from regional schools with hands-on legal expertise. As the immediate buzz quieted, the long-term significance of the moment emerged. Jasmine Crockett had not merely won a debate, she had challenged core assumptions about authority, respect, and expertise in American professional life. Young attorneys from varied backgrounds found renewed confidence. Law students at non-elite schools felt validated in their choices. Women and people of color in professional environments gained a powerful example of how to confront dismissive treatment with skill and intelligence. The legal profession, in turn, began reckoning with its definitions of expertise and merit. Old hierarchies and credential-focused assumptions were being questioned, paving the way for a stronger, more inclusive field. Most importantly, the exchange illustrated that in America's ongoing dialogue about law, politics, and justice, the true measure of qualification isn't the prestige of your degree but your ability to think clearly, argue persuasively, and defend meaningful principles. On national television, Jasmine Crockett demonstrated all of that and more, leaving the legal world forever changed. The showdown between Crockett and Dershowitz will be remembered as a turning point in American legal and political discourse. It signaled the decline of an era in which elite credentials could silence diverse voices and the rise of a new standard where performance outweighs pedigree. For those who witnessed the exchange, the takeaway was clear. Never underestimate someone based on their background or alma mater. Evaluate them by what they know, how they think, and what they stand for.